All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol. And today we're going to discuss the fact that I quit my job and I will be pursuing Mindful Hunter, Mindful Reviews, and one other as yet to be disclosed venture full time in 2024 with no distractions. And obviously, I thought people would be pretty curious about this and want to know how I was able to do that. And then so I put up a little post so that we could, have a little Q&A about it. And then I thought it was also important to give some context around it so people didn't get the wrong idea or, it might seem like this happened rather quickly, but I think once I tell the story, you're going to realize that it actually took quite a long time. And I think it's important to kind of understand the timeline of events and context and all that kind of stuff. Now, before we dive into that, a little bit of housekeeping. So I am doing a huge end of the year giveaway on Mindful Reviews. So if you join up for Mindful Reviews between now and the end of the year, I have 5 prizes that I'm going to draw winners for at the end of the year. So I'll be drawing 5 different names, one winner per person or one winner per prize. And so far I have a Catamount bino harness with all the trimmings, a Kuiu bino harness with all the trimmings, a 511 tactical backpack. It's the Rush 72 liter, and then a Rush 2.0 72 liter, and then I have a Yeti M12 backpack hopper. It's probably close to $2,000 worth of prizes. And so all you got to do is join up at mindful-reviews.com. Any membership, doesn't have to be lifetime. And then I will draw from all the pool of members. Anybody who belongs to Mindful Reviews will be entered into the draw. I'll pick, I think I might have said 5 winners. I meant 4. I'll pick 4 winners for the 4 prizes, and there you go. So that's going to happen. So if you join by December 31st at midnight, you will be entered to win that draw. So head on over mindful-reviews.com. Also, I'm leaving next week, January 4th, to go on an archery mule deer hunt in New Mexico. And so the podcast will probably be audio versions of reviews that I've posted over the last couple months, because I know some people don't have the opportunity to watch those on YouTube, and they like when I post the audio only versions to the podcast. So stay tuned for a couple of those episodes. And then obviously I'll do a gear and a kind of hunt breakdown episode once I get back and things kind of settle down again. So I'm excited. I'm excited for that. Okay. So let's dive right into this. Now, I want to go back pretty far. So I have always been fairly entrepreneurial. I've done consulting in the forestry industry by myself. I've had all kinds of like little ventures and business ideas. I fixed computers when I was in university to make ends meet, working for myself. And I've always had that entrepreneurial drive, I think. I've started a couple of businesses. I've helped, launch a couple businesses. So it's something that I understand and I know that I like to do. But I thought it would be important for me to lay out lessons that I've learned about what not to do before I tell you what works. Because sometimes I think the lessons about what not to do are more powerful than the lessons about what to do. So when I was in my early 30s, I was the sales manager for a boutique, like a high-end boutique gym downtown Vancouver. It's called Studio 55. At the time, we were doing the actors from the Twilight movies, and a lot of hyper successful people trained at Studio 55 and had personal trainers at Studio 55. So I was the sales manager. I used to be a personal trainer, and then I kind of moved out of that role and I was a sales manager. I hated it. And I was doing some video content at the time, and I had this idea for a side business, which funny enough is exactly where marketing went like 10 years later. I was just like early to the party and didn't really know how to communicate my kind of value proposition to the world. But basically, one day I just went in and quit. No notice, no nothing. Well, I gave my 2 weeks, but like no real notice. I didn't even give myself notice. And I had nothing. I had a couple $100 in the bank, lived downtown Vancouver, rental apartment, had a truck payment, the whole 9 yards, and I quit. And the boss, this guy named Nathan, who's a bit of a mentor of mine, he kind of pulled me aside and he goes like, listen, I understand and I respect what you're doing, but you're going to learn you did it the wrong way. And it's because what happened was this decision happened to you. You didn't happen to this decision. And you stuck it out here until you just couldn't take it anymore. And then you quit. Now, whatever you go to do after this, you don't have a war chest. You're not prepared. You don't have resources. You don't have money. And so you're going to be very limited in your options. And I thought about it at that time and it didn't really land. And I went on to do a couple years of like independent media stuff in Vancouver. Like I filmed videos. I was a music producer at the time. I recorded a couple hip hop albums at my house. I built this vocal booth. I used to write beats for people and sell them. And I had a bunch of dance music that was released. I was a DJ. And I was doing a bunch of video content for companies. And essentially my pitch was I wanted to tell the narrative or the story of the brands through short form video content. This is so hilarious that I was trying to do this 15 years ago. And that when people understood the stories of the brands, they would want to participate in those stories. And that would mean engaging with the brands and buying products and attending events and doing that kind of stuff. And so I was like mildly successful for a couple of years. Not even successful, but I was able to do what I was passionate about for a couple of years while paying the bills. But that was the version of like, burn the boats, don't think about what you're doing, be passionate, have an idea, leap before you look. And it's a terrible idea. Now listen, I was single. I didn't have a whole, my monthly nut wasn't that big. If you were ever going to do it, I was in the position to do it. And that was the only reason I made it the couple years that I did. Wasn't making real money. I was probably making 30, 40 grand a year. But I was doing what I love. I got to play a bunch of gigs and make a bunch of cool content. And it was, it was an interesting time to say the least. I got some good stories anyways. After that, I ended up going back into forestry through a weird turn of events, even while I was living downtown Vancouver. And I ended up as an independent contractor for BC Hydro and a couple other forestry companies, and had a great run for a couple of years where I made a bunch of money and got to run my own show. But I think it's important at this point to illustrate the difference between being a freelancer and being a business owner. Just because you give somebody an invoice and they pay you instead of getting a paycheck does not mean you're running a business. A business needs to generate revenue independent of the owner. Like you need to have systems and processes in place that are bigger than just you. And I'm going to get into this more when I talk about my next business venture. But I have a lot of freelancing in my history. And I think most people who think they're in business are actually just freelancing, which just means you're a consultant of some kind. And you just don't have the stability of an employee-employer relationship, but you have the freedom of a consultant, and you normally make a little bit more money, but you got to take care of more in the back end on your time. And it's normally just a personality preference. Like you tend to fit in one mold better than the other. I've always been a better consultant than an employee. But the other thing I learned about being an employee is that my life runs in 5-year cycles. I tend to do things for 5 years and then I move on. And what I learned about Studio 55 is when I was done my stint in that industry after 5 years, because I didn't see it coming, that transition just happened. And I was a victim of my own circumstances and it didn't properly set me up to move on. So now let's fast forward. I go back into forestry, doing my own thing for a couple of years, and then I get hired as a manager at a forestry engineering company. Get a big crew, do a whole bunch of stuff, end up becoming the GM of the company, worked for them for 5 years, and that was like the prototypical employee employer relationship. And it was a great gig. While I was there, I talked the boss into letting me go do my MBA. They have an executive MBA program at SFU. It takes 2 years, and you go every other weekend, all day Friday, all day Saturday, and the odd Sunday you stick around as well. And you have shitloads of homework and group work and all other kinds of stuff. It's really intense. 2 years. Costs $50,000 tuition to do that program. It's a great program for anybody who's curious about it. So I talked my boss into doing this, and my boss says to me, I think you're going to quit when you're done this, but I also think this program is going to change your life, and we're going to benefit from the education you're going to receive over the next 2 years. So he chipped in a bit of the tuition, and he let me take off every other Friday to go do this thing without adjusting my pay in any way. So I went and do my MBA. And here's the thing. The end of the MBA was perfectly timed with the end of my 5 years at Infinity, where I was working, IPSG. And I knew, like at year 4, I'm coming up to my magic 5 years. And this transition, I just run out of gas after 5 years. That's just the kind of guy I am. And I like new, fresh, interesting things. And so even at year 4, I was like, I got to figure out what my next step is. Because if I don't figure it out, it's just going to happen to me. And I'm not going to be prepared. I have a family now. I have mortgage payments. I have all this stuff, other stuff going on. MBA is coming due. And at that point, I was actually structuring a deal for 4 of us to buy 20% of the company. And as we got closer and closer to the end of that deal, and we were getting closer and closer to signing it, I sat down with my wife, did a bunch of soul searching, and I realized I don't want to own this company. It's a good deal. It's a good company, but it was like I immediately saw the next 40 years of my life. Like I knew if I bought the percentage of that company, like that was it for me. This is what I was going to do for the next 40 years. And I didn't like the way that looked. It wasn't interesting enough. It wasn't exciting enough. It didn't have enough potential upside. It was very safe. It was very stable. I could have had a great life for my family, but it just wasn't for me. So then I started thinking, what else could I do? And I'd met a guy in the MBA program who was fairly high up at a provincial health services authority. And he was getting to the end of his tether with his job as well. So we started talking, and he was like, I have this idea for a behavioral economics consulting company. I had a background in psychology. My undergrad is in psychology, and then we were both finishing up our MBA, and I kind of had a focus in consumer psychology in my MBA. And behavioral economics is really all about consumer insights and the irrationality of the human mind. Dan Ariely has this great mind that human beings are predictably irrational, which is a bit of an oxymoron at first, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. And that there's these heuristics or rules of thumb or biases that govern the vast majority of our behaviors. Loss aversion is a great example of an irrational behavior. So we feel the pain of a loss twice as powerfully as the pleasure of a similar gain. So what does that mean? It means losing $20 feels twice as bad as finding $20. And so what happens is we will act irrationally to avoid losses, where we won't act equally irrational to achieve a similar gain. If you want to see evidence of this, look at how people trade stocks. People will hold on to losers forever. And in fact, there's even a thing called escalation of commitment. Like the closer you get to a loss, the more you will invest in that strategy so that you don't have to realize the loss. And so it's like, for example, let's say you buy a stock at $100 per share and you buy 10 shares, you now own $1,000 worth of those shares at an average share cost of $100. If those shares go down to $50, you have lost or potentially could lose 50% of the value of your investment because it's now currently only worth $500 at market value. But if you go buy 20 more shares at $50 a piece, you now own 30 shares at an average cost of somewhere, let's say $63 or $65 for the math isn't quite exact, but you're going to get my idea. In your brain, you're still underwater, but because you've doubled down on your investment, the ratio of your loss is less, and the less the stock has to climb for you to, recoup your loss. People do shit like this all the time. That is a very successful investment strategy under some situations when you have some type of evidence to lead you to believe that the stock is going to come back up. But unfortunately, that's not why people execute that strategy. People execute that strategy in order to dollar cost average their share price down and increase the commitment to that particular share. So anyways, that's an example of loss aversion. There are hundreds. There's confirmation bias. There's anchoring. Most negotiations end within 10% of the first number spoken. And the reason people do that is because you anchor to the first number that you hear. So if somebody says, I'm going to sell you this pen for $10, and then you get it for $9, you think you got a good deal. But what if they'd said 8? Then 9 would have been a bad deal, but it's still just a number. The housing market is a perfect example of this. What you list your house for really matters because you are anchoring people to an expectation. There's confirmation bias, there's anchoring, there's spotlight effect. This was my business for the last 6 years, was understanding how human beings behave, how they think. If anybody's curious, the company that I created was called Bethink, Bethink. And the URL is bethinksolutions.com. And anyways, I decide to go into business with this guy from my MBA. We know each other really well. He's super smart. He's super driven. And the difference between when I left Studio 55 to do the video creation thing and when I left Infinity to do Bethink was that I was 10 years later on in my life. So I had more money. I was more financially stable. We had just done a really profitable real estate deal and I had cash. So at that point, I figured out my burn rate for a year, what I needed to survive and keep all my bills paid for a year in combination with my wife's revenue. And I took that much money out of the real estate deal that we'd had, the profits from the real estate deal, and I stuck it in a bank account. And I said, there's my salary for a year. And I basically paid myself for a year to build this company. And that's what I would say is on the complete other end of the spectrum. So the first time I quit my job, I have absolutely nothing. The second time I quit my job, I have a good idea, but I have zero business, but I have the cash required for me to exist for a year to get this business off the ground. Now, I do think there's faults with that plan as well, but I was almost like overcompensating, okay? The third time I've done it, which I'm going to get into, I did it completely differently. I should say what I did was a hybrid approach of the first two because there were positives and negatives of both. There were times during that first year where I was like kind of lazy. I'm going to be honest with you. Like I had my salary paid for a year. So there was days I got up and I'm like, I don't really need to do anything today. I think it's important to have more incentive like baked into the structure of the process itself so that you don't. I think safety can be dangerous to motivation. I think a little bit of fear and a little bit of anxiety are really good motivating factors. And I think if you can, I've had a lot of really successful business mentors over the year, and a lot of very successful people I know who run big companies will say they embrace the startup mindset. And they will go through things like forced restrictions. Like the company will have bucket loads of cash, but they will actually restrict certain programs in funding because people who have less funding tend to get more creative and tend to find more interesting ways to solve problems instead of just like throwing money at it. So We built Bethink. Bethink was moderately successful over 6 years. I was funded for my first year, so I didn't have to worry about my family. It was very safe, and I knew what I was doing. Now, part of the issue with Bethink is, like I was talking about the difference between a company and freelancing before, and the reason I say Bethink was moderately successful is that while we were highly sought after consultants, like I had several large companies as clients: Lululemon, Adidas, Van City, TransLink, the health authorities, several banks, several insurance companies, Pacific Blue Cross, Arc'teryx. Like, we had really high profile clients, and they really valued our advice. I've sat down with the C-suite of multi-billion-dollar companies and given them my advice, and it was heated, and that's a pretty great spot to be. But here's the problem. We never got over the hump to go from two consultants who were really good at what they did and knew how to deliver results and build relationships to a legitimate business that was bigger than us. And so we made good money, we built good relationships, we had a great time, but it was never going to be anything more than hour in, dollar out. Like, for me to make more money, I had to work more hours. And for me, that is in direct opposition to the definition of a business. Like, if you have a true business, you should be able to make more money without working more hours. And so there was always this inherent flaw to Bethink, that it was never going to be more than a consulting agency at best. And we tried to launch a couple products and do a couple other things and do some software as a service stuff, and had some really interesting, meetings and ideas, and, but basically what happened is that as time progressed, I could see myself getting to the end of 5 years, and I knew I needed a plan B, because I wasn't passionate about that business anymore. And while I could make good money and be moderately successful, it didn't fulfill me. Like, it wasn't what I wanted to get up and do every morning. And so I'm going to pause on the transition story there, and I'm going to back up a little bit, because I want people to understand how long I've been creating content and how long I've been trying to create some type of viable career out of content creation. So I have been making videos of some kind for almost 20 years, to the point where I was mixing things on VHS tape in high school. I used to edit on DV tape on camcorders. I was a personal trainer. I remember I took this one guy to the bush for a week, and we did like a Rocky thing where, I made him eat yogurt and berries every day and carry logs, and I filmed this whole montage. And I used to do these personal profiles of all the other, trainers at Studio 55. And I've always been editing videos. I've always been doing photography. Like, it's always been this passion of mine to tell stories in some type of visual medium. And I started doing videos on YouTube almost 10 years ago. It was funny. Somebody sent me a message on Instagram the other day, and they wanted to come on the podcast, and they made a comment about how I want to do what you do and lead the good life. And I didn't say this, but I feel like I should have said this. And I said, well, if you're just starting now, I think you should be willing to put in 5 to 10 years worth of work with zero return. And be honest with yourself. Like, are you willing to do this for potentially a decade without getting any financial remuneration out of it whatsoever? Maybe the odd like and pat on the back, and people like what you're doing, but no real benefit, or from a financial perspective, or even from a product perspective. I went through a really big learning. I kicked off Mindful Hunter originally almost 7 years ago, and I built it. I came up with it because I wanted a way. I was getting into hunting very seriously, specifically backcountry hunting, and everywhere I looked were like these like dodgy YouTube guys that were like kind of numpties. Like I was watching the Hushin guys at the time, and don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against these guys. They've done very well for themselves, but like they're not the most introspective guys. Like you watch that and it's like it's not intellectually stimulating. It's not engaging. It's not they're not digging into the deeper why about all of it. And it was like that was the shit that was interesting to me. And I couldn't find anyone having those conversations. And there was some other stuff like Donnie Vincent, but then he got like so artistic and flamboyant. I was kind of like, well, I don't really feel aligned with that either. Like I wanted the blend between hardcore and introspective, and I didn't see it anywhere. So I was like, okay, I'll make it. And really all I started doing was filming my own hunts, and I would do like these little like tutorial videos on YouTube. Like I've deleted most of them from my YouTube now, but if you go way back, you can see ones where I did a tutorial on how to make your own pre-workout. Like I was really trying to find out where I was. I had cooking videos, I had fitness videos, I had hunting films, and I wanted to build content. I wanted to create content. I wanted to share stories. One of the real reasons is that it happened is that I came back from one of my first backcountry hunts, and I was trying to tell somebody the story of what it was like to be solo and kill a deer solo in the backcountry and get it out. And I was like, this verbal medium is insufficient for me to adequately communicate the intensity of the experience. And then I saw Solo Hunter from Tim and Remy, and I was like, okay, these guys get it. But it's 22 minutes long. It's chopped up for Outdoorsman's Network. It's kind of a bastardized version of what I think those guys are capable of. And that was when I was like, okay, I got to start filming my own hunts. I'm not the best hunter in the world. I'm not the best filmmaker in the world. But there is a hole in this market for this type of content that digs into the deeper intellectual questions, but is still hardcore and badass and is still somewhat relatable to this kind of sect of the market that I felt I belonged in. So I did Mindful Hunter for a year or two, and then I came to a crossroads between Bethink and Mindful Hunter, where I was like, if Bethink was going to grow, I kind of had to stop doing Mindful Hunter because I needed 100% of my focus. That's a theme. That's why I quit my job this time around, and we'll get into that and my theories on that. But I do not believe focus is a linear equation. What I mean by that is if you have two tasks to do and you want to give one of them 20% of your time and one of them 80% of your time, I don't think you're actually capable of 100% focus between those two tasks. I think there's slippage or switching costs is what you call them in psychology. When you have to, it's why multitasking is a myth. It's a bullshit lie you tell yourself to make you feel better about not really getting anything done because you create the illusion of being busy. The single most way to stay hyper productive, or the single most efficient way to stay hyper productive, is to focus on one task at a time for an extended period of time with zero distractions. And so when I was trying to focus on Mindful Hunter and trying to focus on Bethink, I was kind of doing a somewhat shoddy job of both. Also, I was kind of disheartened with the whole social media thing. Like I'd never started making content for likes. When I started putting up videos on YouTube, and when I first started making my own videos, like even the videos I was making for Studio 55 that went up on YouTube, like nobody would actually watch these things. I didn't make them for people to watch them. I made them because I wanted to make stuff. I came from a musician's background. I used to make dance music. I used to DJ. I liked making stuff. Like there's something inherently satisfying about crafting something from nothing other than your mind. And so I took a break from Mindful Hunter, focused fully on Bethink, got Bethink up and running, and then it was a year or two later, me and my wife were driving home from a Christmas vacation, and we were doing our New Year's goals. We don't really do resolutions. We do goals for the next year and try and be really detailed. Like, have you ever heard the acronym for SMART goals? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, I think. but there's basically having goals that can be measured. And so I was talking to her about Mindful Hunter, and they're like, I'm successful in business now. We're making good money. But I'm like, I'm lacking that creative spirit. Like, I don't feel like I'm bringing anything into life in the universe, I don't feel fulfilled. And she's like, well, I think you should do Mindful Hunter again, but just do it on your terms. You don't have to do it for likes. You don't have to do it for people you don't need the money. You don't need brand deals. And this was where a real pivot point for Mindful Hunter came, because I was at a point in my life where I was pretty financially self-sufficient. I could basically do whatever hunt I wanted as long as I could get the time away from family. I could buy whatever gear I wanted. I had money. And then, so I decided, okay, I'll give that a go. And then I realized that this was interesting because everybody else is saying stuff because they want something. And I didn't want anything. I wanted to try different pieces of gear, and you can go back and find old shoe reviews on my YouTube channel and stuff way before the concept of mindful reviews or any of that stuff was even entered into my mind. None of that stuff was sponsored. But even way back then, I knew that there was a problem, that everyone who is sharing technical gear reviews on YouTube was bought and paid for in some way, shape, or form. So I go back into creating content. And this time, maybe because I'd become a better hunter, maybe because I'd spent more time in the woods, maybe my production value, I don't know. But it really started to take off. And at that same time, within the next couple of years, my interest in Bethink starts to fade. And I knew, I'm like, this 5-year window is going to come. And I'm going to get to the point where I don't want to do Bethink anymore. And again, if I don't control this transition is going to control me. And I knew I wanted to do something in the hunting space. I just didn't understand how I was going to do that and actually generate revenue. I knew the standard approaches of brand deals and all that kind of stuff, I was not interested in. Also, it's a bit of a myth. There are very few people in this industry who are actually self-sufficient from brand deals. They're guys like Levi Morgan, and even Remy still owns a guiding outfit. There's not a lot of guys who's, and even the other guys like Lampers and those guys who are great hunters, they're making money off of brand deals, but they also have all the whole educational aspect, the summits, the tours, the courses, all those things generate revenue for them. So this idea that, you were going to hashtag Vortex Nation and Vortex was going to come down from the heavens with this check for $70,000 a year, and then you were just going to be able to go hunt 12 months a year is bullshit. That doesn't happen for almost anybody. And I knew even if that was happening, I didn't want that. So anyways, I knew my time at Bethink was coming to an end. This is a couple years ago. I knew I wanted to create something in the hunting industry that I could deliver value with and still create revenue from at the same time. So I just kept building and building and building. And then I've told this story 100 times, so I'll skip this whole part. Basically, Mindful Reviews gets born. I do this big backpack review, and it kind of kicks off. I build the platform. We start charging a subscription fee. But I also don't want people to think that is not actually where the bulk of my income comes from these days. I do make money off of it, and I do plan to continue to grow it to the point where it could be something that is my primary source of revenue. But behind the scenes in the last 5 or 6 years while running Bethink, I knew I didn't want to be dependent upon a single source of revenue anymore. I'm 45 years old now. I've worked my ass off my whole life. I came from nothing. I wanted to be more financially independent. So I have been, I'm not even going to say lucky. I've been very thoughtful, and I've made several very good decisions when it comes to money and how I make money. So I've made different investments in different assets. I've had different real estate deals. And I'm at a point in my life where I no longer need the sum total of like a, whatever. Let's say the average income downtown Vancouver like is 150K a year. Okay. I'm no longer at that point where I need 150K a year in order to meet my monthly nut and keep the machine rolling. And so the reason I bring this up is that you have a couple different ways you can approach life. You can find ways that satisfy all your needs, or you can find ways to reduce your needs, and then that leaves you more options for how you want to spend your time. And you don't have to be dependent upon how your revenue is generated to dictate how you spend your time. I realized as I got into my mid 40s, I used to be money. And I used to thought when I have X amount in the bank, I'll feel good about myself. And as I hit my mid 40s, what I really came to realize is what was more important to me than anything else on earth, except for my daughter and my wife, was how I spent my time. I wanted to wake up in the morning. I wanted to say to myself, what do I want to do today? And then I wanted to spend my time doing those things. I didn't want to wake up and say, what do I have to do today to make the ends meet? What do I have to do today to make X amount of dollars so that I'll feel okay about myself at the month end? But I also didn't want to be irresponsible about it. I have a family. We like a certain lifestyle. We like to travel. We own a nice house in Vancouver. I like to buy nice shit. I'm not about to be a brokey just so I can follow my passion. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. So I decided a long time ago I needed to find a way to generate revenue in other ways so that I could spend the vast majority of my time doing the things I loved. And if I had the freedom to do those things long enough, then I would figure out a way to make those things financially net positive instead of net negative. Like let's go back to the fact that I've been doing reviews for almost 10 years. And for 95% of that 10 years, reviews were a financially net negative proposition for me. So I love how people say, oh, it's great, I want to do what you do. It's like, are you willing to lose money doing it for a decade? Are you willing to do it for a decade with the money out of your own pocket and the possibility that it's never going to change, that no one is ever going to give you free gear? And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. If you think this is something you want to do, you need to understand it takes a long time and a lot of work, and you're going to need to fund it somehow. So my recommendation is to go find something you're really good at that can generate a shitload of money and use that money to make more money for you so that then you can do what you love while still having enough money to live the life that you want to live. The other option is just go be broke, have no needs, and spend the most of the time doing what you love. And if that's what you want to do, you can go ahead and do that. I did that as a DJ and a musician downtown Vancouver for quite some time. And it's a strategy. Not my particular chosen strategy, but it's a strategy. So basically, I'm coming to the end of my time at Bethink, and I realize I need to find out another way. Mindful Reviews gets born. And then, we'll go through the Q&A and I'll get into more details in all of this. But over the last 3 months, I've been trying to give 30 or 40% of my time to Bethink, 40 or 50% of my time to Mindful Hunter and Mindful Reviews. And then I also help run my wife's company. And that's something else I'm going to get into in a minute. My wife is a very successful woman. She is driven to the point of obsession. And much like building my finances to a point where they were self-sufficient, if I didn't have the support of my wife and the security that her income brings, like I'm never going to be at the point where I want to live off her income. But here's the deal. If everything I'm trying to do over the next couple of years falls flat, we're not going to lose our house. She has my back. I could go back and get a real job and we'd be fine. Like there's a safety net there. I want to take a little moment and talk about who you choose as your partner and why we choose those people. Because I see a lot of young people getting into relationships for the wrong reasons. Maybe it's not hyper romantic, but when I met my wife and decided I wanted to marry her, I was looking for a partner in everything. I wanted to build an empire. I didn't want a dead weight. I didn't want some hot chick who had no skills. I didn't want some trophy wife that didn't bring anything to the table. I wanted somebody who was going to work equally as hard as me, had an education, was super driven in her career, understood that she wanted to live a certain lifestyle and she was willing to make the sacrifices to do that. And that's who I married. And we got married late. We got married with 35 years old, had our first kid when we were 37. It took me a long time to find somebody who fit that bill. But nothing that has happened over the last 10 years of my life would have happened without me being in a relationship with my wife. Because there's this like exponential impact of two forces like that coming together, that it's not just arithmetic. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 2 × 2 = 4, or 3 × 3 = 9, not 3 + 3 = 6. So what happened was I was trying to split my time between 3 different things and losing ground or having slippage from a productivity perspective on all 3. And it was my wife that said, you need to give up Bethink. It's not where your heart is. It's not what you want to spend your energy growing over the next 10 years. If it was going to turn into the next multi-million-dollar consulting agency, it would have already. Like, you guys have poured your heart and soul into it. You gave it your all for 6 years. If it was going to blow up, it would have blown up, and it didn't blow up. So it is what it is. It's time to cut it. And what you need to do, because you're at a crossroads with Mindful Reviews and Mindful Hunter, they are not to the point where they can be your sole source of income, but they need to be the sole source of your attention, or they need to be the sole source of your focus moving forward in order to get them over the next step. Because that's what happens anytime you build a business or you're trying to launch a brand. In consulting, we call it the valley of death, when you're trying to go from a small shop to the big shop. And you're at this place where it's like, do I bring in more people than I have work, or do I bring in more work than I have people? And if I do either of those, what's going to break first, and how do I keep this thing alive until I get to critical mass and make my business big enough that it can support the flexibility required to adapt to changing work environments? Well, the same thing is true when you're building a brand, or Mindful Reviews, or Mindful Hunter. There's a point at which, if you're not able to dedicate 100% of your time to it, it's like here's an example. I know I need to post 2 gear reviews per week on YouTube for YouTube to push me in any way, shape, or form to grow my channel. That takes me about 50 hours per week. Like, if you were to average it all out between the time I spend with products in the field, the time it takes to gather my notes, filming it, editing it, publishing it, doing the surrounding marketing collateral around it, doing the raffles, like all that kind of stuff. If you were to average it out, just in order for me to do 2 reviews per week is close to 50 hours per week. Now, a lot of that is spent while I'm doing other stuff. So there's still, there's capacity beyond that. But there's no way I'm going to have 50 hours per week to do those 2 reviews while trying to run Bethink and do all these other things that I was trying to do. So she said to me, you need to quit Bethink, you need to do it. So it had already been playing in the back of my mind. I'll be honest with you, I haven't worked full time in like a year, maybe more. I've been working kind of part-time at consulting, bringing in a little bit of money, but trying to work as little as possible so that I could keep focus on Mindful Hunter and Mindful Reviews, because that's, I think, my legacy. I've been looking my whole life for that thing that I think I'm better at than anybody else. Jim Collins has this concept called the hedgehog. I want you to think, a Venn diagram, how it's 2 circles that overlap. The hedgehog is just 3 circles that overlap. And it's like, there are 3 different concepts. One is the thing you think you can be the best in the world at, the thing you are passionate about, and the thing that can drive a financial engine. And when you overlap those 3 things, talent, passion, and finances, where they overlap, it looks like a little hedgehog. that should be where you're spending most of your time, because that's where you're going to have a competitive advantage and a disproportionate ability to create value compared to your competition. Like, I think when it comes to gear reviews, no one can fuck with me. Like, I don't see other people doing the gear reviews like I do, because I don't think they care that much. And I don't think they have the same ability to break things down in a technical way that I do. I'm not saying that to be arrogant. I'm saying that because I have finally discovered the thing that this like weird assortment of talents and skills I've been picking up my whole life have come together to forge this unique ability. I'm not, and I'm being a little hyperbolic, I'm not the only one. But when you look at all of the stuff on YouTube, 98% of it is like pretty low quality. There are some other dudes that are doing high quality stuff, but again, it's high quality, but it's different than mine. Like, I don't see anybody doing exactly what I'm doing. So I knew that eventually mindful reviews was going to be the thing that I wanted to pour my heart and soul into and grow. So while I haven't been working full time for the last year or year and a half, there was still a large level of anxiety about cutting the cord. Because here's the thing, if Mindful Reviews or Mindful Hunter ever just shit the bed one day, I still had the ability to dive back into the consulting in a full-time way and go out and drum up some business and kind of support my income in that way. I think that's a negative thing. I'm a burn the boats kind of guy. I think being fully committed and not having an exit strategy, I'm not advocating being irresponsible, but I think psychologically, when you know there's no back door, you are more committed and you exert more energy. And so I'm doing two very specific things in order to facilitate those circumstances. Number one, I met with my business partner over the holidays and I said, I'm done. He knew it was coming for a long time. He's actually transitioning into something else. It was a phenomenal conversation. He's one of my best friends in the world. I trust him beyond anything. And it went great. But what I did was I pulled away that one safety net because it was important for me to be psychologically committed to the new venture. Number two, when I left the forestry gig and started Bethink, remember I told you I took that chunk of change, plunked it in an account, and paid myself a salary for a year. I'm not doing that this time. Theoretically, I could do that, and I still know there's money over there if the shit hits the fan. But I think it made me lazy and weak to have this little nest egg just sitting there. And I knew that whatever I did, I could still have a paycheck at the end of every week. I don't want that this time. I want to be the onus on me. You know, in sales, you always have, there's this expression, you eat what you kill. And you know, when you're a full-time commission-based salesperson, when you wake up in the morning, if you don't close anything by the end of the day, you don't eat. You don't make any money. That's the kind of hunger I want right now. So I didn't fill up a bank account with a salary for a year. I quit Bethink and I closed out. And a lot of people will ask, and we'll get into this more too in the Q&A, was there anything to sell? And here's the thing. With a consulting agency, unless you have multi-year signed contracts, there's not a whole lot to sell. We had some cash kicking around, so our fiscal year end is June 30. There'll be a dividend payment. I'll get a nice check, goodbye type of thing. And I think we might even just shut the corporation down and my business partner can go do his own thing solo afterwards. But there was no golden parachute. There was no big sales check that was going to fund my next venture. None of that kind of stuff. Now, I can't get into the details yet, but the other kind of final straw with all of this is that over the last 3 months, I've been nurturing another business idea that is normally things come to me really quickly in like these flashes. And it's like with Mindful Reviews, I just saw it one morning and I'm like, I get it. It's a community. There's raffles, there's forums, there's a monthly subscription. It's like I saw it all in my head and it was just a matter of building it. But this new business idea has been building slowly over the last 3 or 4 months. I'm going to be launching it mid-February. I will be at in attendance at the Hunt Expo in Salt Lake City, and I'll also be at the WSSBC Sheep Show in Penticton. I'll have a booth at that one. I'm also giving a seminar on solo hunting at that one. This new business idea will be launched by then. I will share about it and all that kind of stuff. I've already dumped about 10 grand into investments in this new business. And I knew like there was just no feasible way that I could pay any attention to anything else other than Mindful Hunter, Mindful Reviews, and this new business idea if I had anything else, vying for my attention. So that's how I finally had to cut the cord. But I just want to reiterate a couple of those concepts. It is very rare that you get to transition, especially when you're going to do your own venture in this like crisp, clean, nice, neat way. You know what I mean? Like you don't go one day from being an employee for a company to the next day to having your own business and financially it's all smooth and everything's ready to go and you don't have to worry about debt or any of that. Like that's not how it works. Also, very rarely in life are you able to be 100% committed to one thing and then just one day be 100% committed to the other. You need to go through this transition period where you're probably operating at something closer like 130% potential. And what happens at that point is that your resources come from somewhere else. Like if I go over my limit for too long in a row, I'm a shitty husband, I'm a shitty father, I'm shitty to my friends, I'm grumpy. And there have been periods over the last few years where I've had to be like that. Because in order to meet my commitments with Bethink while still putting the energy into the mindful, ventures, 100% wasn't enough. It was like you had to work your desk job all day and you had to work your side hustle all night. And you had to do that without the guarantee that the side hustle was ever actually going to turn into something. And I think the main takeaway there is that Mindful Hunter and Reviews was always stuff I would have done for free. Like a nice thought experiment that I like to run is, let's say you won $1 million. Well, that's a shitty experiment because $1 million wouldn't get you anything these days. Let's say you won $50 million tomorrow. What would you get up and spend your time doing? I can honestly tell you I'd still do the same shit. I would just do it at a completely different scale. I love making hunting films. There's almost nothing else on the planet I like more. To share those stories with people, to inspire people. And, from a cheesy, I love being out there and being able to create that visual imagery and bring it back and share it with people. And I love doing gear reviews. I love breaking things down. I love finding things that are wrong with products that might help people save money. I like being able to articulate how certain products compare against other products. And I like that I don't have to give a shit about what the brands think. Agree with me, disagree with me. I don't care. You're not my customer. You're not the person that I make this shit for. I make this shit for the guy at home spending his hard-earned money on this product. I care if he believes me. I care if I'm of service to him. I don't give a fuck about the companies themselves. Like, they're nice guys, but like, this is where I think everybody gets it backwards. Like, as soon as you start being friends with these people, it's like, are you being super honest? Do you have a lot of integrity anymore? Because now you're trying to say nice things to these people who are your friends. And it's like, that's not what it should be. It should be these unbiased appraisals of products that let the products stand on their own merit, regardless of who makes them. Anyways, I can honestly tell you the only thing that would be different if I won $50 million tomorrow is that I would do more of it and it would be bigger. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could buy all the spotting scopes. I could go on all the hunts. I could buy all the video equipment. I could hire people to help me edit. It would just be bigger and better. It wouldn't even change. I would still do the same thing I'm doing. And if you have something like that in your life that you're willing to do for free and you can be dedicated and consistent long enough, you will find a way to monetize it. Because people are willing to pay for value, and people should pay for value. If somebody brings value into my life in any way, I want to compensate them for it. In some relationships, that's just done through affection. In other relationships, it's done through money. Like, it just depends. But anyways, that is essentially, and so to put one more, kind of close out one more point, you'll notice I told 3 stories. I told the story of leaving Studio 55 in order to start my video creation business. I told the story of leaving Infinity in order to start Bethink, and I told the story of leaving Bethink in order to start the Mindful Group. Now, all 3 stories are different, but they're also the same. They're the story of transition from one phase to another. There are things I did poorly in some phases, in some transitions, and there are things I did really well in other transitions. But I tried to approach each new transition with the lessons from the previous one. And I feel like this last one, moving from Bethink to Mindful, was the most successful. It had the least impact on my relationships at home. It had the least impact on my finances. It is the one that I feel most excited about, even in just the types of activities that I'm going to be doing. And so I just wanted to kind of pass that on, because I don't want people to think like, just woke up one morning and knew how to do this shit. And I've done a bunch of shit in my 20s, even before that first story, but I just think these stories, these 3 in particular, tied together very nicely. And I think it shows that it takes effort and it takes time, and you got to iterate, and it's trial and error, and you're going to burn sometimes and you're going to succeed sometimes. And you just got to keep trying and trying and trying until you figure out what it is that works for you. All right, we're going to jump into the Q&A, and I did a quick scan and I've tangentially touched on a lot of these. So I'm only going to ask the ones that are, can add some value to the conversation. So the first one is, how difficult was it to leave your job, and did I like my job? I touched on this a little bit, but I think I can add some more insights here. It was difficult to leave my job because it was, like I mentioned, cutting away a safety net. And I liked my job because it made me feel good about myself. One of the things that I was worried about with Mindful Hunter and reviews was that I spent a lot of time and energy and money getting a very fancy education, and I used to deal with Fortune 500 companies, and that really feeds your ego. It's like, I must be smart if all these really smart people want to listen to me. And it's very rewarding that you're building this high profile consulting agency. And then I'm like, am I a failure because I'm going to walk away from that and then go spend my days hunting? And I had to do a lot of soul searching to figure out, like, is this really what I want to do, or do I just want to do it because it's fun or easy? And I can honestly say, after a lot of thought, there are just as many business challenges in what I'm trying to build moving forward, and I wouldn't be able to solve any of those challenges if it wasn't for the experience and the education that I had previously. So yes, I liked it, but I only liked it because of the way it made me feel about myself. What do you feel sets you apart from the rest of the industry? Talent, no BS, uniqueness. Again, touched on this earlier, but I think instead of asking myself this question, I want to ask you this question, the person who's listening to this right now. If you're considering charting your own path moving forward, I know I have a very clear answer. I've already given it to what sets me apart. Do you? Congrats, and what's your plans for this year? So I'll save the thoughts on the third business until I launch it. And I haven't written my New Year's goals for 2024 yet. So I will share those in a more specific way later on. But I can tell you 2 things I'm going to do. I need to spend at least 100 days in the field in 2024. I think I was like 90 something in 2023. I lost track at some point. It was a lot. But I want 100 days in the field minimum. And during certain periods of the year, I need to consistently hit 2 videos per week. Now, lots of people would think, oh, don't you have like social metrics or views or like new follower. It's like, I don't care about any of that shit. I care about the activities that by proxy create more value. Like if I spend more days in the field, that means I'll create more hunt films because I'm going on more hunts. It means I'll have more days to review more gear because I'm in the field more. Like it's not about the 100 days. It's about what the commitment to 100 days means for everything else I do. And it's the same with the 2 videos a week. I don't care about the followers. I don't care about the views. I know that if I consistently put out 2 high quality reviews every week, the rest of that shit takes care of itself. And that's another word of caution I want to share with people. Like the amount of followers you have or the amount of views something gets is meaningless. It's about the impact that it has. Some of my least viewed videos are the most impactful because I know they've had an impact on what gear people buy or how they look at gear. And it's like, that's way more important to me than getting a bunch of views. So right out of the gate, 100 days in the field and a minimum 2 reviews. Now, the reason I say during certain periods of the year is that I have my 2024 blocked out in a calendar into like on season and off season periods. So on season is when I have a bunch of hunts back to back. Off season is when I don't. And there's like 2 or 3 of those sections every year. When I'm in on season, I can't create videos with that frequency. So the idea is to have these 3 to 4 month blocks where I create 2 videos a week and then a couple month break where I'm still putting out video content, but I'm out in the field more and I'm actually doing the work and testing the gear that I will later create the videos about. So it's almost like sprints. You know, you have a field sprint where you test a bunch of shit, take a bunch of notes, get to know a bunch of gear, and then you have a content creation sprint where you make a bunch of videos, do a bunch of raffles, engage with the community a whole bunch, and then you just slide back and forth between those two modes. How do you feel about it? Were you nervous? I don't think nervous is the right word. I think once I knew that Mindful Reviews, like people saw the value in it, I knew for a fact that I could build it into something that would be worthwhile of my full-time energy. The nerves are just more around the steps. Like I don't want to screw something up or do something out of order or be rash. Like I'm bad for that. I'm very impulsive. And so, but when I finally came time to make the decision and I talked to my wife and I talked to my business partner, like I feel more calm now than I ever have. Do you plan to start incorporating events like the land navigation idea you talked about in the past? 100%. One of the things I'm hoping with the new venture that's launching in February is that I'm going to get more of like a retail space going. Not so much a retail space. It would be more like a shop where I can do more testing and record more reviews, but it would also have the ability for me to do seminars and have maybe 20 or 30 people come attend somewhere in the Lower Mainland. And then we could get into more like gear seminars, land nav seminars, any, food preparation seminars, like the types of things that I think I can deliver value in and the stuff that I have a lot of experience from years in forestry and all the rest. So 100% that is on the radar. Maybe 24, maybe not, but definitely coming up here, I'm going to start incorporating activities like that. This is an interesting one. What's the end goal for Mindful Hunter, Mindful Reviews? North America presence, revenue, or just living life? One of the things I've never really been able to do with any of the businesses or brands that I've started is get over that hump and have them be bigger than I am. Now, I am in no rush to do this with Mindful Reviews because I think it needs to be done really slowly and really tactfully. But if you asked me what my 5-10 year vision is, it would be more people like me that aren't sponsored, that are very technical, very articulate, that could be reviewing more gear. I'm limited in what I can do, and is because I'm just one person. I can only test so much gear. I can only create so many videos. Also, I'm under a bit of a time crunch. because something new will come out and somebody wants a review on it right away, but I need to play with it for sometimes weeks, months, ideally even years before really giving you a review. And if I use everything that long, I don't get that many reviews out. But if there were more people working on this, I could play with stuff for longer because I wouldn't be the sole source of content. I don't know what that looks like right now. I have one or two people in mind who I think have potential to add to the community in that way, but I'm very nervous because right now I know my level of integrity and I know how much I care about the reviews I do, and I'm concerned if that would be the same for other people. But like, yeah, I love the idea that in 10 years, Mine for Reviews is this community with, a group of committed reviewers who are thoughtful, have integrity, are highly experienced, communicate very well, are highly articulate, and we're constantly putting out, best in class gear reviews for hunting related equipment. Yeah, I would love that to be the case, but I have a lot of, trepidation. So it's like that shit ain't happening anytime soon. So this is an interesting question. How does it feel to go full send on such a scale? And I don't think I touched on this directly in the other parts of my conversation. That final moment when I could say, because everybody's always asking, what do you do for a living? And I always got to say, well, I'm a business consultant, but I like to review gear. Being able to fully embrace the fact, like, what do you do for a living? I hunt and I review gear. There's no safety net. There's no anything else. Like the sense of pride and like it just feels different now. And I think when we feel differently about something, we carry ourselves differently. And I think it is going to impact the level of professionalism I have, the level of dedication I have. Like this is my full-time gig now. And so it needs to be treated like my full-time gig. Here's another good one. How did you prepare your spouse and colleagues for your departure? I can't stress this enough. When I was younger and single, I did what I wanted when I wanted. And I burnt some bridges because of it. And I said I didn't care at the time because I was, focused on what I wanted to be doing. I think the way that we conduct ourselves and the wake we leave behind us is one of the rare things we actually own in life. And it's taken me a long time and a lot of bad experiences for me to realize that sometimes how I treat people is more important than, the actual activity that I'm executing. So, how I treated people during the transition from Bethink to Mindful might be more important than the transition itself. Letting people have a voice in how things occur, bringing my wife into the conversation earlier, honestly listening to her opinion, saying, this is what I think, what do you think? My wife is brilliant. To not take advantage of the way she thinks about things would be like shooting myself in the foot. And so having them own part of the transition, talking to my business partner, when I had the conversation with him, I said, listen, here's my proposal. This is how I think we look at the next few weeks, month, year, this is how what I think a good way to close out things would be, but get back at me. Well, what do you think? I'm open. Do you want me to work longer? Do you want me to work less? How do you want to do dividends? Like I'm open to all. Are there things I can help with during the transition? And letting people own that transition with you lets them feel like they're in control. And I think people are more supportive and I think they're more understanding when they feel like they're participating in the event as opposed to the event happening to them. So that would be my biggest takeaway in that regard. There was another question in here about revenue generation and how content creators make money. And I just got off the phone with another buddy of mine who's trying to kind of start his own thing. And here's what I'm going to say. Most of the traditional methods of where you think people make their money are not. Like I make about probably $6,000 a year on YouTube through AdSense. You need to be a gigantic YouTube channel if you want AdSense to be an appreciable part of your revenue. So that's for anyone in the hunting industry. There might be a dozen channels in the hunting industry that are making real money off AdSense. Unless you've got like north of 500,000 followers, it's not that much. It's not that enough that you're going to quit your day job. That's for damn sure. Brand deals, you got to be big, man. To get real money, 99% of people in the hunting industry are getting free gear, and that's about it. It is very rare that money is actually, and that's the thing that blows my mind. These guys on YouTube are whoring themselves out for free product. Like, think about that for a minute. $1,000 pair of Vortex binos, and you're willing to trade your integrity for that? Like, what does that say about you as a human being? Like, the thing is, I don't think anybody ever actually phrases it like that. They're like, well, what's the harm? They're decent enough. And I'm like, well, the harm is you sold your integrity for $1,000. And if you're okay with that, go ahead. But brand deals and sponsorships are also not, again, unless you get huge, they're not going to be an appreciable part of your revenue. Merch definitely creates revenue, but you need a decent sized audience to like flick that revenue stream on. The best thing I have done, the thing that has created the most financial freedom in regards to reviews, has been the subscription platform for mindful reviews. That's more financially beneficial than anything else I do in the hunting industry. But you don't necessarily want to look at it as like, because if that was the case, then all I should do is do gear reviews. But I'll tell you right now, I get more new subscribers from a hunt film than I do from a gear review. And those new subscribers from the hunt films end up watching gear reviews and then potentially end up joining mine for reviews. So the idea is to think of it as a content creation ecosystem. I create content on Instagram. I create hunt films on YouTube. I do a podcast. I create gear reviews and post to the Mindful Reviews platform. And by growing all of those channels, when there are things that create revenue generation opportunities, you have a bigger community to draw from and more people you can offer that value to. My podcast is big enough now that I could monetize it if I wanted to. But realistically, I would be making less than $1,000 a month from the podcast. Maybe close to that. I don't know. It's hard to sell because everybody's ad figures are a little bit different. But I've been very intentionally not turned on ads on the podcast because in a way, I think it goes against the grain of the non-sponsored thing. Is there a future in which I entertain potential sponsorships? Sure. The example I always use is like GMC. I drive a GMC Sierra. My last 3 trucks have been GMCs. I've been driving GMCs for almost a decade now. If GMC called tomorrow and said, we want to sponsor your podcast for $10,000 a month. We want a 30-second ad spot at the beginning, and we want some visual collateral a couple times throughout the year, I would sign that shit in less time than it would take the ink to dry. Why? Because I honestly believe in that brand. I love those trucks. And I don't believe it influences my integrity when it comes to doing gear reviews. I've never reviewed a truck. Trucks have nothing to do with hunting gear. So do I think there's opportunity for sponsorships that don't influence my integrity? Absolutely. Am I super anxious, like almost scared shitless about taking one of those because I think it would be like the internet's opportunity to just take a fucking dump down my throat and say everything I've said for the past 10 years is bullshit? 100%. So I don't even know if that would ever happen, even under best case scenarios. But I know that turning on some bullshit ad for goodfood.ca or whatever other horse shit you hear on podcasts just to create an extra little bit of revenue damages my brand equity as a whole. I would rather people who participate in my community get to listen to my podcast ad free and then support me in another way. Go buy a piece of merch. Go join Mindful Reviews. Like, don't give other companies your money. If you like what I do and you want to support me, give me your money. It's like those charity things when they ask you at the grocery store, do you want to give $2 to this or that? I say no every time. It's like, listen, I don't disagree that there are sick kids that need money. What I doubt greatly is the ability of some random charity that's paying their fucking board executives $100,000 a year to actually take the $3 I'm going to give you and go give it to the kids. It's the same thing with brand deals. I would rather be honest with you and have you put your money towards the ventures that I release, and then I can be responsible for making sure that money gets put towards more reviews and creating more value to you. So that's my recommendation to people. I think there's this misbegotten notion that I'm going to create a podcast that's so big, I'm going to have a bunch of sponsors. And it's like, in the hunting industry, highly unlikely. Or I'm going to grow my YouTube so big that the AdSense is going to pay the bills. Hunting industry, highly unlikely. However, growing a niche audience of people who trust you, who you deliver such incredible value to, who are then willing to support you financially through your own mechanisms, whether it be Patreon, Mindful Reviews, a merch line, consulting of some kind. I thought about getting into nutritional consulting, like other ways in which you financially benefit from your audience directly. That to me is the way of the future. Like, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, how do I do what Jay is doing? My response to you would be, try and think of a unique way that you can deliver value that would be so compelling to people that like $5 a month is a no-brainer. If you can do that, I think you're onto something. And I think you're onto something with integrity. And I think you're onto something that has a chance of growing to the point where it can be your full-time focus moving forward. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's actually a ton more questions, but after going through all of them, I quite honestly touched on them in some way, shape, or form during the kind of big monologue that opened this whole deal. So I don't really think going into them in any further depth is going to add any more value. But if anybody wants any further information on this, feel free to drop me a DM on Instagram, mindful_hunter, leave a comment on the YouTube video, or send me an email, jay@mindfulhunter.com. If you could share this with somebody that you think it would benefit and you could help grow the community, or if you could take a moment and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice, I would greatly appreciate it. And remember, 4 big ass prizes coming up in like 3 days: Catamount Bino Harness, Kuiu Bino Harness, Yeti M12 backpack hopper, and 511 Tactical Rush 2.0 72-liter backpack. All you have to do is join Mindful Reviews, and you're entered to win automatically. mindful-reviews.com. I hope this was entertaining or educational in some way, shape, or form. It would be physically impossible for me to be more excited about 2024 than I currently am. And I honestly hope that wherever you guys are at, in whatever thing you're doing, you feel the same level of excitement about what this next year has to bring for you. So all the best to you and yours over the holiday season. And as always, until next time, thank you for tuning in.